MSW Media.
SpyTalk, a podcast at the intersection of intelligence, foreign policy, national security, and military operations.
Had enough excitement yet? Hi there, I'm Jeff Stein, and this is SpyTalk. Michael Isikoff is off this week. So now we have a new war in the Middle East, if you want to call the one-sided Israeli pounding of Iran a war. It's still going on as we speak amid stark differences between U.S. and Israeli intelligence on whether Iran was close to making a nuclear weapon, much less whether it could put one on a missile anytime soon. And this week we have more antics by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. After her weird video about the imminent danger of nuclear war surfaced this week, even some Republicans threw up their hands. She obviously needs to change her meds, said Louisiana's Republican Senator John Kennedy. Meanwhile, Trump administration officials keep yapping about taking Greenland, especially now that China has shut off the spigot of rare earth minerals. Greenland has plenty of those. A friend of mine raised a good question. Why doesn't Trump just ask for them? In any event, this week I had my good friend Luis Rueda, who spent 28 years in the CIA running espionage and covert ops programs, concoct an imaginary covert ops scenario for Greenland. You really should go over to the SpyTalk site on Substack and read his hilarious piece. But in the meantime, you can hear Luis talk about that and many other contemporary intelligence issues bedeviling us right now on the SpyTalk podcast. And so without further ado, Luis Rueda, welcome to SpyTalk. What a gas to have you on. You wrote this hilarious piece of satire for SpyTalk this week, giving advice to the president of how to take Greenland without firing a shot. And my favorite line from it was, our usual preferred method, a military coup followed by a brutal dictatorship, is a non-starter since there is no military in Greenland to work with, and clandestinely creating a military that we could later subvert would take far too long. I laughed out loud at that line. Very funny.
We're really good at military dictatorships. It's the easy way. It's just suitcases full of cash and some cogent direction.
But the guy keeps talking about taking Greenland. Let's put just Canada aside for a moment. What goes through your mind when you hear that? I mean, you, to remind our audience, spent decades in the CIA, and you've had a hand in this stuff. Covert action stuff. So how do you take Greenland?
To put it in simple words, it's a waste of time. I don't understand what the issue is. We have always had easy and ready access to Greenland. It's a part of Denmark, and Denmark's part of NATO. We've had military bases there. We still have one military base. The only reason we don't have more is because we pretty much said we don't need more.
It's cold.
Yeah, it's miserable. That used to be where the military sent people as a punishment to Greenland.
Right. Thule Air Base, it was known as.
So, we have access to anything. What do you want? You want minerals? You go ask them. I said, sure, bring an American company.
Go ask.
Yeah.
They'd be happy to sell us the minerals.
Yeah, it's gosh darn, and you like the way I'm watching my language. It's gosh darn pointless.
That's very polite for you, Louis. It is. We've known each other a long time, and of course, we really appreciate that. Cleaning it up. But, not really. You can say what you want here.
No, it's look, there's got to be something else there. It's either distraction.
Do you hear anything from your old buddies about this?
No, nobody's paying attention. Greenland, nobody takes it seriously. What
do you think? If Trump keeps saying it again and again, his handmaiden, a CIA director, is probably, saying, well, get me a plan.
Yeah. Again, a waste of time and money and effort. There are 56,000 people in Greenland. You land the ready battalion of the 82nd Airborne in the base we already have, and it's done. You land 17 Marines dressed up as tourists. It's done. We don't need to really do this. And I don't really think that anybody in the agency is taking it seriously, even though, as you point out, the senior ranks will have to kowtow and rah and do what he wants, because that's the kind of administration we have. You have to accept what the dear leader wants. But people at the agency are focused on more, I guess, serious things that are brewing. Mexico is something they've always talked about, and they're serious about the cartels. And the agency has always had a robust counter-narcotics capability, and that's something that they want to tap into. And I think they're focused on that. And now we're focused on what's starting to look like some trouble with Iran in the Middle East. That's just happened over the next couple of days. So nobody at the CIA is giving a lot of credence to Greenland. I would tell you, if they form the Greenland Task Force, then you start paying attention.
I think we'd hear about that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But you had a big hand in Iraq, so to speak, intelligence activities in relation to Iraq. So, that history included Vice President Cheney constantly going out to CIA analysts and sort of peering over their shoulders, pulling up a chair at their desks and pushing them to find links between nuclear weapons and Iraq. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and what did the CIA do? At least the director of the CIA said, "No, okay, they want to invade Iraq. We'll go along with this." Well, it was famous WMD.
It's a lot more complex and nuanced than that. There was, as you point out, you're right. There's a lot. I've never been in a time when the vice president, a sitting vice president, was down at the agency several times a month, literally carrying intelligence reports annotated with his hand and stuff, and asking questions, and at times badgering the analysts. They wanted WMD, which the agency, and not just the CIA, but NSA, DIA, the British, the Germans, everybody believed that Iraq had WMD. And that was, pure and simple. We believed it. So nobody had to go to the agency and say, I want you to produce intelligence that shows WMD. No, we did. We believed it. Then there was their link to 9/11, to Al-Qaeda, to terrorism.
Another bit of false intelligence.
Yeah, and they came up with a lot of intelligence reports, which we pointed out to them. Those are from fabricators, from people we have no confidence in. We think they're bullshitting. And that's one of the moments where the agency stood up and said, no, there's none. You can do whatever you want. There is no relationship. There's no connection between Al-Qaeda and Iraq, which is why they formed that DOD, intelligence cell to come up with that information.
Yeah. So what you're saying was there was enough suspicion there, bolstered by bad intelligence, that the administration, which wanted to invade Iraq,
yes.
right after 9/11, they started saying, well, let's go after Iraq.
Yeah, look,
who
they
cares
would
about Al-Qaeda?
If Saddam ran down the street with a rubber band and a paper clip, going to put somebody's eye out, we would have invaded Iraq. Mm-hmm. They were dead set on that one. All the intelligence reporting that I saw, that we saw, was 70% that he had it and 30% that he didn't. And the preponderance was he's got some kind of WD, but it was a faulty calculation, because they did one of those mathematical calculations. He had this much before the first Gulf War. We destroyed this much, so we assume this is what's left over. Wasn't the case.
Yeah. Had we had actually the Iranian nuclear scientists on our payroll, they would have told you that Saddam put the program on the shelf back in 1990.
Well, in honesty, the Iraqi nuclear scientists were lying to Saddam.
That's right.
Yeah.
They had to tell him they were making progress.
Yeah.
Or they'd get their fingernails torn out.
And that's the problem with these dictatorial, authoritarian, cult of personality regimes. People are going to lie because they're concerned about themselves.
Let's extrapolate from that. Can you find some CIA analyst who's going to tell the president that Greenland has nuclear weapons?
You will. Hey, listen, they do. The U.S. had a B-52 crash, I think, in the 60s, right, and they did not recover one of the nuclear weapons. It's still missing.
Yeah. So we can extract them.
Yeah, we can extrapolate
can make a
that
case.
The Greenlanders found it, hid it, and now are a nuclear power. And
they have a missile somewhere, under the ice.
Well, it's probably drawn by a dog sled, but nonetheless, it still presents a danger to America.
Let's turn to Mexico. I hadn't had that on my bingo card for today, but let me posit something conspiratorial about cartels and intelligence agencies like, say, the CIA. Mm-hmm. Having some ranking cartel people on your payroll is good for infiltrating the government, right?
Sure.
So in effect, cartel members become partners of the CIA or assets of the CIA.
Well, yeah, but then you start getting down to the nitty gritty. And it's not the supposition. It's the case officer work. To get a cartel member, you've got to be able, like anybody else, you have to be able to offer them something they want. What are you going to offer? Money?
They got plenty.
Jesus, these guys have got money stacked
more
10
than Fort
feet,
Knox.
literally. Yeah, 10 feet high. I knew a guy who was, he went to a house out in the countryside where one of these cartel guys was, and he went looking for the bathroom, and he opened a door, and he said, I couldn't walk in the room. It was filled with cash.
They had swept it up from the floor. That was not the main.
They couldn't launder the money. They're making too much money, so you can't offer them money.
All right, so CIA, I don't know how long ago it established its counter-narcotics center. It was a long time ago, last century anyway.
Yes.
So it's been working on this for decades. Hasn't worked very well, right? And
it has, but you're pushing the rock up a hill. The Sisyphus thing. I'll give you an example. The U.S. government, and I'll use the U.S. government example, dismantled all the drug cartels in Bolivia at one point. Big success. All we did was eliminate the middleman, and the Mexicans flew directly into Bolivia and started buying it. It's not that the programs aren't successful. They are successful. It's the wrong tactic and strategy to use against narcotics trafficking. For every person, no matter how low or how high you take off the chessboard, there are 10 people lined up waiting to take their place.
Right. Anyway, it's failed. So we can't say we've had much success against the Mexican cartels or the famous cartels in Colombia. We took out Pablo Escobar, with the help of one cartel.
Tactical success and strategic failure.
Right. And so what's the strategy? If you're a CIA director tomorrow, what's your strategy?
Oh, you don't want to hear my strat. My strat. Look,
sure I do.
No,
you're
I can
one
come
of
up
the
with
smartest CIA guys I've ever known.
Oh, no, you don't know many. Then I am hardly the smartest guy. But look, you can come up with half a dozen plans to go after these guys. But what the U.S. government doesn't want to hear, what the American people doesn't want to hear, is we are the problem. We consume the drugs, giving them the money they use. We sell them the weapons, and we launder their money. And if you don't, it's the concept. Well, you were in Vietnam. You know the concept. If you can't get at the safe havens, you can't. If you can't get into North Vietnam, you can't get into take out the Laotian and Cambodian part. They're always going to have an influx. If you can't get, and it grows exponentially because then it's China and this kind of stuff. As long as they have that, doesn't matter what you do to them in Mexico.
Or as long as Americans want drugs.
Exactly. You can wipe out every single cartel and every cartel member in Mexico tomorrow. The day after, there'll be 50,000 running drugs into the U.S. Yeah. They'll reform like that. It's
just say no is not a strategy.
It's not a strategy. We and this is the problem. They want to go in and start killing people bombing laboratories. Okay, fine. Again, bomb a laboratory. What does that accomplish? These are not Pfizer laboratories with huge infrastructure. Some of them are big, but they're pretty much mom and pop big. So they can just take them out, move them someplace else, and then eventually they start moving them into the cities. And then what are you going to do? Bomb apartment complexes? It's whack-a-mole.
So what do you think the Trump strategy is going to be? I mean, they talk about ginning up the military. They've talked about airstrikes on cartels and so on. What do you think of all that?
They're going to do exactly that. And they're going to go in and it's going to become a mess. They'll bomb. You got two options. They'll bomb some laboratories, kill a few people, and then declare victory and go home, not having solved the problem at all. Or it'll become a quagmire, and they'll keep going in and in. Because I have learned throughout my almost 30 years at the agency that the U.S. governments do not learn from the past. They continue to make the same mistakes. The same shit time and time again. And, these guys, you can draw from a pool of highly experienced CIA people, State Department people, DOD people, DEA people who can tell you, here's what the problem is. Here's what we've done. Everything they propose has been done before. They're proposing something on a bigger scale, pretty much taking the mask off. Most people tell you that's not going to do it. As long as you got people willing to pay.
Stupid question, huh? Why do they keep doing these stupid things?
Because they don't learn. They don't really learn.
Why?
Nope.
Another stupid question. Why don't they learn?
Because sometimes they're lazy. Sometimes they're stupid. Many times domestic politics drive what we do overseas.
Vietnam is a good case of that,
Yeah, you can tell them this is not going to work, but they say, well, I don't care. I got an election coming up.
I just reviewed a book about LBJ and McNamara for those under 50. Robert McNamara was a very influential Secretary of Defense under John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was assassinated. LBJ, his vice president, Lyndon Johnson becomes president. And they know essentially right away that the Vietnam War is a loser, but they keep doing it because there's an election coming up. Yep. And they can't be seen as cowardly, retreating in the face of the communists in Vietnam. So they keep the war going and going and going and going.
Yeah, the old statement, I'm not going to be the one to lose the war in Vietnam.
Speaking of wars, let's go back to a territory where you're well acquainted with, the Middle East. So the British Navy maritime authorities are warning that there's an impending Israeli strike on Iran. It would be no secret if they did. It would be no surprise because Netanyahu's been straining at the leash that we put on him to attack Iran. And for his own political reasons, by the way, attacking Iran is a good idea for him. Trump is trying to negotiate a deal, trying to get back to something we had, under Obama. Which, he trashed that, and Iran kept on its nuclear path. So now he's desperately trying to get back because he doesn't like war because he's chicken shit in a good way in some ways, inadvertently in a good way. But anyway, so what do you predict? The U.S. The State Department is putting out warnings to all our embassies and consulates in the region for non-essential personnel. Always an insult to people who are not deemed essential. Non-essential personnel have to leave. So what do you make? If they go ahead and carry out a massive airstrike on Iran, how do you see that playing out?
Well, predicting is very hard. I think you have probably two options. An Israeli attack on Iran is not going to destroy the nuclear program. It'll discombobulate some things. It'll give them some problems. But the key infrastructure is buried too deep for them to get. It requires a sustained air campaign. That's not one set of strikes, which the Israelis can do, but sustaining something over weeks, if not months, is going to be hard.
And they don't have the bunker busters.
They don't have the bunker busters.
The mother of all bombs.
Yep, they'll be screaming. So they'll do some damage. And Iran, then it's pretty much up to Iran as to how they respond and how measured they are. Lob some missiles, 90% of which get intercepted. Several do some minor damage, and I hate talking like that, but you might have a few dead, but nothing that nations can't deal with, and then it kind of calms down, and that's option one. Option two is if Iran says, F you. And does some, not only launches missiles at Israel, but launches missiles at U.S. bases, conducts terrorist acts outside of the Middle East and other places, and kills some Americans, then you got a problem, because the administration will be under pressure to respond. Understanding, and this is what always drives me crazy, we created the problem. And now we feel pressure to respond to what we will say is Iranian aggression, because we want everybody to just suck it up, take what we give them, and don't respond. Well, that's not going to happen. Iran will respond. The question is how deeply. If they hit asymmetrically, we will be under serious pressure to respond, and that changes the equation, because once the U.S. starts going in, it's hard to get out.
We have to take a quick break. Okay, we're back. It just occurred to me. It made me think about your satire, your wonderful satirical piece about how to overthrow Greenland. And you say we can't subvert the military because they don't have one. So and it would take too long to create a military to subvert. So that's ridiculous. And so there's a kind of a rough parallel here. Obama put a throttle on the Iranian nuclear. Obama and the Europeans, in concert with us, put a throttle on the Iranian nuclear program, where they agreed to calm things down, and now they've been calmed down. So it's almost like the Israelis or Trump built it back up by smashing that agreement, and so now we have something to go destroy again.
Yeah, we 70% of the time we create the problems ourselves. As you point out, we had a working deal. Was it the best? No, but that's negotiation. You don't get everything you want, but we had enough that it slowed down their program, put a pause on it, and the Iranians had expectations of easing of sanctions in return for this. And you could see where that could play out over the long term into something where, okay, we'll give up this program if you do this for us. That's negotiation. That got thrown out the window. Then we show back up, 4 years later, whatever, 8 years later, and say, okay, we want to renegotiate the same deal. But the Iranians are looking at this like, we can't trust you. You're the same yahoos who blew up the last deal, and now you're showing up to give us the next deal. And then, we say, okay, we look like we're getting someplace, and maybe we'll be allowed this. Oh, no, we're not going to allow this. Yes, we're going to allow this. So, they're getting thrown out. And then you've got the Israelis on the side of, we don't want a deal. We want to bomb them. Not only do we want to bomb them, we want you to bomb them, because we know you can do it. And they want to drag us into a war with Iran so that we can assuage Israel's concern over Iranian nuclear program.
One of the few areas of bipartisanship these days is that the Biden administration did not want, in fact, told the Israelis to stand down. We're not going to help you, and we don't want you to bomb Iran. And Trump comes in, and for entirely different reasons, psychological reasons, he wants to make a deal with Iran. So there's, because they're isolationists, essentially. So both Democrats and Republicans, they don't want. So it's kind of a big roll of the dice for Netanyahu. But then again, if he leaves office, he can go to jail. So he's got to keep creating conditions.
He'll get what he wants. He'll get what he wants. So they can pressure the U.S. government, U.S. politicians. Trump's hesitancy to get involved in these things, I think is a good thing, because he's got that businessman mentality where there's no profit in war. We're not going to gain anything. And he's right, because, again, we shouldn't look at this like, oh, we go in and this is a surgical strike. We bomb the shit out and we go home. Everything is over. It is not going to be over. And it's only going to get, you've seen it. You know how the Middle East is. It's only going to get messier and uglier and worse. And somehow we cannot pull ourselves out of there. It's like a drug. We're addicted to going in there and blowing shit up. And then we get a bigger problem.
Nightmare. So I want to swing you back to your old outfit again. Do you have any worries that, you may have noticed in the paper today, a former CIA officer was sentenced to 3 years in jail.
Yep.
For stealing and leaking secrets in relation to the Middle East and Israel, Israel's plans to attack Iran. Do you worry that more disaffected CIA officers, especially ones who have been unfairly fired in this DEI purge, or they're pissed off because of Tulsi Gabbard's manipulation of intelligence, which is getting worse and worse by the day, as the reporting shows. Do you worry about more former officers selling secrets?
Yeah,
or current officers?
Yeah, there are people who will tell you, oh no, we are, our people are top notch, we're loyal, we're patriotic, all that kind of stuff. Having spent almost 30 years subverting and suborning people, that's a load of bullshit. People join, they have the best intentions, they're loyal, they're patriotic, they put their lives on the line, they sacrifice. But as a case officer, I understand that, as you go along life, things change and you have bumps in the road, and all of a sudden you have pressures. And now all of a sudden, at the later stages of your career, before you can retire, you have kids headed to college or in college, you've got a mortgage, you got all this shit, and somebody comes along and says, you're gone.
You're fired. Yeah,
not because you're an idiot, because you're incompetent, because I have some artificial number of people I got to get rid of. You're fired. As a case officer, I'd be standing outside that gate with throwing $100 bills like a stripper. And it's like, come on, I'm here. The odds are, if you get rid of, say, 1,200, 1,500 CIA people, 1% of that was what, 12 people?
Yeah.
That's a hell of a good recruitment.
People have told us that there's just a basic calculation is 1% is going to turn bad to one degree or another. May not sell, documents to the Russians, to the Chinese directly, but will turncoat in one manner. But it's an absolute predictable number. Yeah. And as Sue Miller, the former head of counterintelligence, told us in an interview recently, if you bump that up to 2%, you're talking about tens of thousands of people in the national security community, DOD, CIA, NSA, who could be out there peddling secrets.
Yeah. And it's not just that, because, intelligence services are pretty savvy. You may not get a SVR or Chinese MSS officer coming out at you. You may get a European consulting company come at you. Well, we know your background. You have all this shit. We'd like to, come on in. We'll pay you a horrendous amount of money.
That's exactly what happened to one of my contributing editors here at SpyTalk.
Yes.
He was approached by a research company that turned out to be a front for the Chinese MSS intelligence service.
Yeah, it happened to me.
And they said, we're just looking for people who understand, political events in Washington. Seth Hatena, my contributor, he smelled a rat right away. But so he played along and said, yeah, I'm interested in that. And then they quite clumsily, rapidly up. Maybe they're just being efficient, to weed out people right away. They escalated their ask right away. They said, well, we really want inside dope on what's going on in the Trump administration's national security circles. And so Seth opted out at that point and wrote about it and kind of exposed them. But that's a very common way. The Chinese stole all the OPM personnel files. They've totally infiltrated LinkedIn, where there's thousands of resumes, a million resumes. Ex-CIA and other people put out their resumes on LinkedIn. So you just know, just through an AI algorithm, they're peppering these people with consulting offers.
Yeah.
And you suck people in a little bit. Again, this is, as you know, and I know, this is classic espionage technique. You get somebody to do a favor for you, an innocuous favor. You've got the dynamic in motion to eventually recruit them to steal important things.
Yeah. And if you have people from the national security community who have been fired and are under significant financial pressure, they may sort of suspect but turn a blind eye. And, in their mind, I'm not committing espionage, I'm working for a company. And, deep down inside, they understand what's going on, but they'll do it because...
and not actually committing espionage. I'm not really giving them a stolen classified document.
Yeah, people
I'm just
justify a lot of stuff.
And so just to put a fine point on it, you do think that the DIA firings and other mass firings in the national security community is going to have some, if it hasn't already, has some...
I would be surprised if hostile intelligence services and friendly intelligence services didn't come away with a significant number of recruitments, if they haven't already.
Well, we know of a case, actually, of a CIA officer selling documents to Germany or offering documents to Germany. I guess the Germans turned around and let us know about it right away. But maybe the French wouldn't.
Oh, no, the French won't.
The French,
Yes.
Sure, they'd love a source high up in CIA or recently departed from CIA. As you know, one of the things that, what's his name, the big NSA leaker, this escapes me at the moment, now in Moscow.
Oh, yeah.
One of the documents he saw, ranked the espionage threats against the U.S. Israel, France was right up near the top.
Yes.
So,
the French have a very, very good and aggressive intelligence service. They do a lot of commercial espionage. They really go after technology.
But speaking of letting secrets out, do you have any doubt, or what do you think, if Trump tries to utilize your old outfit for illegal operations? For example, that they're churning at the bit. There's been some reporting on this to turn the CIA loose against enemies that the Trump administration wants to go after.
Yeah.
Would people at CIA step forward and say, we're not going to do that?
Yes and no. What is happening, what's going to happen is that those, as contradictory as this is going to sound to a lot of viewers and listeners, the CIA and most of the national security community have a very high moral bar. We expect it from, because we put them in situations where they can do a whole lot of damage. And we expect them to have a very high, well-defined morality at this thing. And you're going to get, at the first blush, you're going to have a lot of people who say, no, that's wrong. That's illegal. I'm not going to do it. And this administration has no problem shunting them aside, getting rid of them, and bringing people in who will say yes. It's the CIA and everybody else recruits from the American population. We reflect America. And what you see out there, you're going to see inside the agency. And I've heard already that the mood inside the agency has shifted. Well, you have a lot more people who look. When I was in the agency, I barely knew anybody's political affiliation. Nobody ever talked about it. I never heard anybody refer to themselves as a patriot. People did their job. They knew what their job was. They did it. They put their ass on a line and delivered. Nowadays, you go in that building and you know who MAGA is. You have MAGA people ratting out other agency people, saying, "Oh, they're not pro administration, or they've said this, they said that." You can see there's going to be a movement to bring those people up, bring people from the outside, hire that way. The hiring process now, I think it's been out in the press, includes how do you support President Trump? How are you going to support his policies? What are you going to do? They're looking for loyalty before capability, before efficiency, before whatever. So they're going to have more and more loyal people. And those people will say, yes, whatever you want. An aside, communists always love slogans. They feel it preps the people. And every year, I remember the Cuban government always had a slogan for that year. And one year, the slogan was loyalty before efficiency. And I'm seeing that as the slogan of the U.S. government now, loyalty before efficiency. Are you loyal? And then your qualifications become secondary. So we're going to see a lot of that happening, and they will do what they're told to do.
Which has two negative outcomes from our point of view, I think. Mm-hmm. One is that you shift the intelligence analysis to fit the preconceived notion that the White House has. It's very worrisome already, of course, that Trump's virtual alliance with the Kremlin, or at least Putin, doing Putin's bidding, attacking NATO, just unthinkable in my lifetime. So you have that. On the other hand, you may have more people who object to this MAGA influence in the intelligence agencies and who will leak more of real secrets, and not just to the press, and we of course, we hope that they will leak evidence of illegal activities or questionable influences in the intelligence world, MAGA influencing. We hope we will leak that. But they also may be so pissed off they'll leak, sign up with the Chinese, especially if they've been fired, they got kids going to college, got a mortgage to pay.
Mm-hmm. Look, we've had serving agency officers recruited by the Russians and the Chinese. Look at Ames, look at Hansen, look at Howard. They've done it. So to think that it's not going to happen is you're fooling yourselves, you're lying to yourselves, and it's only going to get worse because we have given more reason for people to commit treason. When you have a sense of my organization no longer stands by me, my organization stabbed me in the back, my government has treated me like this, the bonds of loyalty start to erode. And there's a point, well, if they're not going to be loyal to me, why am I going to be loyal to them? And that's one of my complaints. When you look at the business world, and we have a lot of business people now in this administration, loyalty is a one-way street. Be loyal to the corporation, but we're not loyal. We'll fire you like that. And when you're in the military, when you're in the intelligence field, loyalty has to be a two-way street. You have to be there for your people. You have to be loyal. When you treat them like shit and you fire them for no reason, no cause, those bonds of loyalty break. And you no longer feel like, and again, I've exploited this in other people for decades. And there's guys out there waiting to exploit it on our side. I guarantee you there'll be, and we won't know about it because they'll handle it well, but there's going to be at least 15 to 20 recruitments coming out of this administration.
Well, enough happy talk. Luis Rueda, I always learn so much talking to you and have my prejudices underscored. Not to abuse the term, but we grew up and we served the government as patriots. It wasn't a big, loud bugle note with us. It was just part of the way we grew up, You got to do things. I didn't run to Canada when I was drafted. It just wasn't in my DNA, not in my family's DNA. So I did it. In the Army, I got acquainted with the intelligence world, did Vietnam, came back, and then I was out on the street protesting against it. But the idea of turning coat and selling secrets, boy, that's really a situation which used to be rare, and now it's becoming all too common. And like you say, we could expect some more really explosive cases that are going to be discovered of people turning coat, selling documents. But what you worry about, of course, is the ones that are not discovered.
Well, but you assume there's a lot going to be discovered. At the same time we're talking about this, the FBI is reducing its counterintelligence capability. They, oddly enough, are moving a lot of the people away from that into areas like immigration. And you can see the U.S. counterintelligence capability diminishing as the counterintelligence threat rises.
And equivalent moves and cuts in the Justice Department.
Yeah.
Subject for another day. Luis Rueda, thanks so much for coming on the SpyTalk podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
See you around. And that's it for this week's SpyTalk. Be sure to check out our complete podcast archive on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, do check out the SpyTalk.co news site on Substack, where we offer a steady diet of scoops and original analyses on the intersection of intelligence, foreign policy, and military operations. Just Google SpyTalk and you'll quickly find your way there. This edition of the SpyTalk podcast was smoothly produced, as always, by Kanai and edited by Molly Hockey for MSW Media. And so that's it for now. See you next week. I'm Jeff Stein.
For more original reporting and insights like this, subscribe to SpyTalk.co on Substack and follow us on Twitter at @talk_spy. If you enjoyed our podcast, subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
MSW Media.